We are slightly late because there's another historical event taking place behind us on the TV there, but we shall ignore it. Thank you, Gyekye. You're obviously on the right path. So let me welcome you all again to this. Is it for Neil? My God, um, this event. Our moderator today is Professor Ofori-Atta. I'm sure she needs no introduction from all of you. She's a major personality in Ghana. She's known for her academic achievements, for her many other achievements. But she will be taking us today. Let me introduce the other members of the panel. Mr. Gyekye Tanoh, who I believe also is known to you. I'm mistaken. Okay. He will introduce himself at the appropriate time. Another Fredua-Agyeman is also another well-known. He and Fitz Baffour are the hosts of a cultural program which is running now, and all of these people are media people who are known to the public and who have an interest in the historical events that led to our development as a nation, to making Ghana what it is today. Today, we are going to talk about the history, the run up to the independence of Ghana, what it has meant for us all as individuals, as a nation, how that perspective, or what the various perspectives that fed into that independence have led us to, and where we are today. I'm sure our moderator will have her own spiel. For Ghana Club, it's about what we as a club meant to this movement that led to our independence. This club was founded in 1947 and was a forum for a lot of the debate that went into the making of Ghana. There was a lot of hope, there was a lot of enthusiasm, there was a vision, a dream, various visions, various dreams, but at least there was a common goal towards independence. And whether or not that has been a positive development is a matter for debate. No doubt that will be raised in our discussions today. So without further ado, let me hand you over to the moderator, Professor Ofori-Atta.
Thank you so much, Mr. David Adoashong. Thank you. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm looking forward to a very good conversation this evening. Usually at this time of the year, the media regale us with stories and clips to mark Independence Day. And collectively, we celebrate those who played pivotal roles in the processes leading to freedom from colonial rule. The perspectives we have on the independence movement come largely from school texts and the media, and they give us a pretty good sense of that part of our national history, but not necessarily a complete picture of Ghana's long and bumpy walk to freedom from colonial rule. History, as we all know, is always contested, and in its telling and retelling, ours has tended to leave out certain details and actors as well. So this evening, our panel will lead us in a conversation on independence, its implications and bearing on us today, and they will offer us more perspectives to enrich our understandings of the ideas, the struggles that have brought us to where we are today. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a conversation in which you, the audience, are all a part of. So at the appropriate time, I'll be inviting you to intervene through questions, comments, perhaps even short anecdotes that would help broaden our knowledge on the subject. I see Ambassador Cabral is here, and he actually has written a book. Ambassador, your book, 1947 to 1957. So I'm sure he has some nuggets to share with us at the right time. But first, let me introduce you to our panel. I think David already started. And so I'll start from the far end, Mr. Fritz Baffour, who is a media and governance consultant and a staunch member of the Ghana Club, I understand. Then there's Nana Fredua-Agyeman Ofori-Atta, who wants to be known simply as a citizen of Ghana from Achimabwakwa. And last but not the least is Gyekye Tanoh, a social justice activist and campaigner. So gentlemen, welcome. I've been asked to keep you in check, but I'm sure that will not be necessary at all. So here are the rules, very simple rules. You have 5 minutes to make your opening statement first, after which we will continue the discussions, conversations amongst you, and then I'll open it up to the audience. So who wants to go first? I will defer to Fritz. Fritz.
Thank you very much. Prof, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is a conversation that is after my heart. I'll go straight to the point. On March 6, 1957, just lived around the corner. It's now, where we lived is now part of the debris of the proposed National Cathedral. And that's where we lived. And it was very near, it was next to the State House, about a way from the castle. And the road before it, the road is called Castle Road. So actually all the eminent people who came for the independence celebration, that was used as a ceremonial to take them to the castle and back wherever they were coming from. So naturally, I wasn't too far from the activities that were taking place, either before or after. And my father at the time was a very senior civil servant and passionate nationalist. So, and I had a little bit of knowledge about what was going on. I went to my dad and I asked him the question. I said, what is independence? What does it mean to us, knowing that the Gold Coast was going to become Ghana? And he said this to me. He said, it means that the sky, and that 2 years from now, your generation will be either as good as America or better than even Britain. And so that's what it means. The opportunities are watched for you. So that was what I held in my mind. And the next decade or so, I saw examples of the greatness of what Ghana was, could be. So independence was something like an opportunity that are a reason for us to fulfill whatever destiny the Creator had for us. So that is my comment at the moment, because it will impact on the history that led to the independence of Ghana, and then afterwards. It's been since 1957, we're talking about 66, 67 years. And it's something that we really have to consider, because the disappointments have been many. The highs too have been in evidence. Thank you.
A really great opening statement. Nana Fredua, do you want to?
Since you started with Fritz, I thought it would be a matter of age, and therefore I'd come in last. Okay. To my right is my senior in school.
Sport gray hairs. Your beard.
Oh, no.
Exemption.
So thank you very much for having me here. This is rather an august panel, and in the scheme of things, I should be sitting in the audience, truly. Although I'm
older than Mr. Baffour. I was born after independence. She got confused. So everything is more hearsay and what you've read and all of that, and then a bit of your background. And so I'd lean off what he did and lay mine too. That's what influenced what I might be putting out, my background. Born in the year of the coup, born into a political environment, seen military coups, become an activist myself in more ways than one, partisan and other areas. So when I've sat back and put all of that together, my perspective on, one, did we deserve independence? Two, when we got it, was it at the right time? Three, what have we been doing with it since? I, for example, don't hold the view that we should be hard on ourselves about having gained independence or otherwise. When I was a boy, there was a friend of my father's. It's called Mr. Kathleen, and he used to say every now and then to me, in other words, we shouldn't have let the Europeans lead, the British lead. And his perspective was based on what he saw as disorder in our system. And because he was born way before, he was born in the 20s, his view on how things had changed at the time he was speaking influenced his thinking. So that's a perspective. I had a conversation with a very young person this afternoon, and I asked the same question. And her response is, well, what did we get independence for? If we find ourselves going back to the same people who we supposedly were supposed to be freeing ourselves of and doing things on our own. So when you blend the two positions, you come off, for me, just saying, let's move on. We really shouldn't be hard on ourselves, but we should be very clear about what has gone wrong and what should go right. So for me, as we go along, you gave us 5 minutes, so mine is up. I'll wait for the questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and apologies for the laptop. It seems very officious and all that. I saw a movie. I remember the line says, "You take a penknife to a gunfight." This seems the opposite. But no, I was just trying to get a couple of quotes together to kind of guide and orient what I had to say, and I was too late to print it, so I have to inflict this on you. Well, what did we get out of independence and so on and so forth? Important questions, very important questions. Nonetheless, I think that those who initiated the movements for independence had their own views and visions. And I think those are as good a place to start from as any. Okay, I mean, clearly, I think at the time of independence, we can clearly say that there was more than one conception. There were rival conceptions of independence. If I was to summarize them in a very, pithy way, which therefore runs the risk of being oversimplified, one would be that, the citizens of the country and their chief representatives ought to be in control of the decision-making, of the political governance, of the economy of the country. That's one view. No one will quarrel with that in that broad sense. A second view went a bit further. A second view for me is captured very much by the title of a book that I'll recommend to all of you. It's a book by an Ethiopian American, a woman called Adam Gyekye. I don't know. She'll forgive me if she hears me. It's called World Making. World Making. The Rise and Fall of Self-Determination. In other words, the business of self-determination of independence does not end on your border. It must reconstruct the world in a certain way. And I think that there was a strand of nationalist movements which embodied that to some degree, to the degree that there were those who thought that, getting states together in a more Pan-African vision and so on and so forth, going beyond your national boundaries, if need be, was an important dimension of that. The second dimension of that was that to come into nationhood, to really have independence, it was not enough to attain the attributes of pre-existing states. So the United States has an army, it has a flag, it has an American president. Is that enough for us? No, it's not. And so you found that there was a project which involved trying to ensure that those post-colonial, newly independent countries gained in terms of the international order, in terms of their power and their influence, in terms of global governance, decision-making, so on and so forth, key definitions of key attributes, universal rights, self-determination, and so on and so forth. But that required that those who historically had benefited from our oppression, their powers are reduced somewhat. And in a sense, it makes sense. It makes sense because democracy, as I understand it, is the containment of power. Those who are weaker must contain. That's why kings were overthrown and so on and so forth. Or colonialism was overthrown to start with and so on. So that is a rival definition of independence. Whether that was fully realized or not, I think we can leave that to the discussion. But why I want to stress on that is because it means for me that the independence project necessarily had to involve, or for some, they believe that it ought to involve an altering of our relationship with the world. If you had dominant states, we must have a greater assertiveness, greater freedom, and so on and so forth to assert ourselves. But there are those who also reflected on the fact that it can't end at your borders. It can't simply be about, because even within your own country, the influence of slavery, the influence and the legacy of colonialism meant that there was a great degree of unevenness and inequality within your own. And if you do not address that, you will end up, in the words of Dalit's, anti-caste critique of Nehru Gandhi project in India. And I'll end on this quote. He says, "To leave inequality between class, between sex, untouched, and to go on passing legislation relating to economic problems is to make a farce of our independence and to build a palace on a dung heap." Now, palaces on dung heap is exactly, I think, where we are. And I think, and the reason why I say so is that there's a new form of nationalism which I think reflects that shift that has taken place.
And
so let me leave that
to let you come back and expand on that idea, but you've captivated our minds. But I really do think that both Fritz and Nana Fredua also, in their opening, pointed to the fact that there was a certain expectation that we haven't lived up to. But before we get to why and how, I thought it might be helpful also to talk about some of the ideals of independence and some of perhaps the histories of independence that we don't highlight enough, but that perhaps if we did would be sort of motivating us in the right direction. So Fritz, you want to take a stab at that?
Thank you very much. In 1900 and up to 1901, that was when the British had become the most dominant European power in what we now know as Ghana. There were three polities at the time. There was the Gold Coast Colony, there was the Ashanti Protectorate, and there was the Northern Territories. And the British had become the dominant force. And initially, I think in the early 1850s, they wanted to leave because the slave trade had ended and there was a bit of a downturn in terms of the economic activity that that came out of the Gold Coast, of this area. Eventually, the Dutch left, the Danes left, and the British took over from them. And they had to deal with the post-slavery society. I won't go too much into that. But by 1900, they'd taken over certain things that happened in Europe that impacted on the colonies themselves. That was the Industrial Revolution, which required a lot of steel. Steel had an important component, which was manganese, which was which was discovered in great quantities in the Gold Coast. So they looked at that. Diamonds and gold were there. Timber was also very much part and parcel of the big building process in Europe. Cocoa was a very important sideline to most of the very rich in Europe. We also had palm oil, which had become also a new form of gold. And so the British decided to stay. And in staying, they had to ensure that there was some kind of order that favored them. And we know that from the 1900s when they took over, they started an accelerated development program And I find a few Ghanaians talking about the way they came in with the roads and the railways and things like that. But the British, like other colonialists, wanted to have a more efficient way and cost-effective way of exploiting the resources that we had. And so that's why the railways came in. That's why the roads were built into the areas where we produced, where the commodities were mined or exploited. You'll see that the railways in Ghana all end up, or their depots are all in areas where mining and farming commodities were exploited. If you go to Takwa, it was about gold. If you go to Bibiani, it was timber. If you go to Kufode, that area, if it's Baffour, cocoa, and all that kind of thing. And just an aside, when we started on our railways, the passenger railways, we brought in Indians to come and advise us. Because right now, the Indians are regarded as one of the best managers of railway systems. And the railway system in India differs from us, despite the fact that we had the same colonial powers ruling over us. Their railway system was based on taking troops as fast as possible to troubled areas. So the transfer from carrying troops to passengers was easy. With us, it was cargo, and that's why we have problems with our railway systems now. You have railways in Takwa, coming from Takwa, Kumasi. It doesn't go beyond that, and there's another side to it for that too. When Gaggisberg took over from Governor Clifford in the before the 1920s, Clifford had made a lot of money from exploiting the resources and had built up the reserves of the Gold Coast. And when Gaggisberg came in, he decided to accelerate their development even further. The reason why he did so was he had been the Surveyor General of the Gold Coast. He was a military engineer and had been to every nook and cranny of the country, and had actually met the people of the Gold Coast firsthand, and found out that they were capable of managing their affairs, and he wanted to actually use them as the proxy for exploiting the resources of the Gold Coast, because the mortality rate of the Europeans who came to manage the economy and manage the colony was very high. So as an engineer, he thought of how to do it. And the first thing he did, and you'll know about it, is that the deep sea port was built in Takoradi, because prior to that, we had ships offshore, and they used to use canoes for the stevedoring and to cart the goods and all that kind of thing. So he got into the deep sea port, which was built in Sekendi Takoradi. And then he decided that most of the educational facilities that we had, or institutions that we had in the Gold Coast, and I'm using that instead of saying Gold Coast, Ashanti and the Northern Territories, they were based on religion. All our top schools, including the Presbyterian Training College, which was built in, I think, 1834, was to produce people for the church, either lay preachers, administrators of the church, or clergy. And naturally, in that there was some kind of pedagogy, Latin, mathematics, and all that. But he concentrated on building a secular institution, which is Achimota. And Achimota wasn't just a secondary school. It was the powerhouse for training the human resource base to manage the colony. And so from kindergarten to tertiary. And I know there are a lot of people here who at Achimota who will attest to the fact that they came up with the code and the methodology in which it was to train people, which became the forerunner for cementing the core that we're going to work for Ghana after independence. I'm just giving you this brief thing, and there's another aspect. In 1914, when they had the First World War, they took 60,000 people from the Gold Coast. And let me tell you, around that time, I'm sure the population of this area we now know as Ghana was less than 2 million. And they took 60,000 people out. They went out of the country, most of them, came back with an awareness of new opportunities and things like that. So from that period, at the end of the First World War, right up to 1947, youth clubs, literacy clubs, all those things were founded. In 1945, after the Second World War, 120,000 Gold Coasters came back. And when they came back, they did not come back to the cities. They went straight back to their homes, because at that time, Ghana was a rural society. I mean, 80% to 90% of the people lived in the rural areas. And it brought about some kind of social transformation. So these are some of the things that we've got to look at when we consider the road to independence and the problems and the pluses that arose from the attainment of independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Fritz. You took us way back into colonial history and some of the... But Nana Fredua, do you want to add to what Fritz has just said? Especially, perhaps you want to move us a little bit forward from the 1940s into between the period 1945 to independence, 1957. What were some of the pivotal events?
This one, David didn't tell me this one will come.
Oh, you're going to tell us about it, but okay.
Because fact is, and it's the reason I passed the quiet comment about I'd rather have been sitting. When this man is sitting next to me, I always keep quiet, because I use his information that he gives me to talk to people. So, but having said that, I can't give an accurate history. I can't. But there are perspectives to add to what he raised to give a general overview that I'd like to share. And it comes, my views come from, again, like I said, talking to old folks and a bit of reading. And then, you know, when you put it all together, it raises questions. So he's given, for example, he's initiated industry issues. He's initiated awareness issues, things that would, when put together, would now push us into thinking, well, why can't we do this for ourselves? So, for example, with those who came back from the world wars, realized that we were not as dumb as the colonialists seemed to make us, because they became aware. People who were being shot next to them, who they were saving, were humans. They were blood. They had same blood color. You know, basic things like that, that brought the awareness. And because they could speak English and whatever, whoever they were colleagues with in the war front didn't exhibit anything extraordinary in a situation where our humanity is at stake. We're both facing the barrel of a gun. We become equal, regardless of skin color. And so that type of thing we take for granted. We seem never to think about those things, but they matter in analyzing who we are. And that's why you'd have the Sergeant Ajites of the world do what they did. But there was something that happened years ago for me, in addition. I went, by the way, one of my many faces is why I said I was a citizen, is that in my hometown area, I'm a traditional authority. So now when you go into an environment like that and you want to reflect on these types of things, you ask yourself, so what exactly was our role? Is what we were taught in schools, what is on the ground? So I asked those questions. And years ago, this was, I've been a member of the palace as a traditional authority for 23 years now. One of the functions, I went to a function in Legon, and Professor Baffour, great historian, emeritus professor, gave a talk about pre-independence and traditional authorities. So what was done, when I concluded everything, analyzed everything that he had said, I asked a question. I said, so would he say that our traditional authorities let us down? Or is it that we didn't respect them going into independence and after? The reason I asked that is, when you listen to the role of traditional authorities in preparing us for independence, and some of them did. I mean, Nene Matekole, the Anglo, Togbi, he has what, Togbi Sri, yes, Ofori-Atta the first. They were sitting together and preparing. People have a bad view and thinking about them. I used to have a note written by Ofori-Atta the first to Togbi Sri, saying, he says, my brother, and they're preparing to meet at the House of Chiefs. You know, I had a handwritten note. For me, the reflection, therefore, was they had a plan. And should we have stuck with their plan, or should we have merged their plan with the populists on the ground and the educated activists on the ground? Should we have done that? Would it have changed things for us? Would it have moved? You talk about the period. In that period, where were they? Would it have helped us change? Because they came with the perspective of, they were already leading our people, but they were leading them in societies. He doesn't like the word ethnic, so I get sensitive around this man. He influences me too much. You have to talk to him. You know, but, you know, if it's Ochin, he's looking at Chims. If it's the Krobo, Nene was taking, you know what I'm saying? So you can make an argument about, okay, so how would they have come together? But they understood that. These were traditional, these three that I've mentioned, among others, they were not the only ones, were people who had experienced European education, come to understand its value, understood the political systems, and were quietly blending us in a manner that would prepare us. That's how I understood what they did. So, in my thinking, that's them. Then the educated activists. I don't want to call them elite, because we also do that, and I think it doesn't help us. The educated activists who went to England and other places and studied and came back, came to realize why we needed independence. And so whichever skill or area they were in, they were rallying themselves together and demanding it. And somewhere in there, they also took advantage of the opportunities that populism and other things brought. So they had their role. Why didn't they merge with traditional authority? That's a question I'm looking for somebody to answer. Then there's the academics. The academics, people went to school, became academics. So what were they analyzing that didn't give them the blueprint that we deserved as a country? What is it? Because I haven't seen or heard an academic of those times, or about an academic of those times, who espoused theories and thoughts about what Ghana, you know, when Bazini was talking, he was referring to some, I think it was an Indian, right? I mean, yeah, they're writing books about their dreams about where society, where were ours? After having gone and experienced Oxford and what you call those places, where were they in the scheme of things? So for me, I can't give you details of 47 to 57, but these are questions that I would have put to people who were around at that time. They should tell us.
Well, perhaps there are people in the audience who can contribute, but I really do think that it wasn't a question of some people didn't play a role and other people played a role. And I really also think that there were the early nationalists that predated World War II who started on that journey and whose thoughts were, Fritz mentioned the literary club. Sometimes they would discuss topics like that. And sometimes in the newspapers, you will see that they use the newspapers a lot in espousing their vision and in also asserting the fact that Ghana had its own traditions that needed to be respected by the British and all of that. So, Gyekye, who were some of the early actors behind the long walk to independence? Because we like the short history too much. That long walk, who were some of these people? He talked about the chiefs, and I appreciate that very much, because we don't tend to add them to the narratives.
I hope you're not asking me for a long history. Be careful what you wish for. I'm quite happy to oblige, but I think there might be a rebellion on our hands if I attempt it. But I think that both my colleagues have touched on very important points. And but I think that we ought to, in terms of looking at other agency beyond chiefs and so on and so forth, we ought to look at the subsoil within which these efforts, one by the returnees from World War and so on and so forth, secondly by chiefs or and whoever else, what was the changing society in which they were trying to do all these things? Because obviously, if you have a situation where you're building railways, a number of things change. One of the things that changes, for example, is that railway workers come into being. You're not simply talking about people sitting in a village farming and so on, all due respect to them, but it's a different thing. These are people who have certain skills, they have a certain professional pride, they have a certain way in which their mode of work organizes them and gives them a national network. They are the ones going up and down. So if you look at our independence struggle, people like Pobi Bani and so on and so forth, titans of the railway struggle. Sekondi Takoradi was a melting pot for all kinds of ideas of ferment, of struggle for decades, including music and so on. So fashion, name it, okay? And one of the reasons is this. Now, it's important, therefore, not to kind of be quiet on the fact that this might have created tensions. Because, for example, if you take, for example, the railway workers, if you read even a novel, you don't even have to go and read it. Gyekye Ama's Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. Yes, it's true, it's set in the post-colonial era. But what he's pointing to at the time is that in terms of the operation of the railway, there's a certain favoritism. Okay, big cocoa farmers, those who are connected to people in politics in the state and so on and so forth, have a precedence in terms of, this was the colonial pattern. Whether it's in East Africa, whether it's in West Africa, whether it's in Ghana, you'll find that the British merchants or those associated with the British merchants will pay less for freight. They have first priority for whose stuff goes and who doesn't go. They pay less tax on the produce itself and so on. In other words, a market, an economy was being constructed where certain monopoly interests were gaining priority. Without that, it's impossible to understand the resistance of those railway workers, not simply in terms of British colonial rule writ large, but to the fact that in their own sphere of work, there's a lack of democracy. Of course, in this case, a racialized democracy, but nonetheless. Also, it's impossible to understand the role of, let's say, market women, because these were market women who were, in effect, enthralled under the grip, the iron grip, of the Association of West African Merchants, one which passed into a local, these are people who gain monopolies and so on. In other words, there's a ferment of people who are looking at more than one thing at the same time. They are not simply looking at the fact that white rule must be replaced by local rule. They're also looking, in addition to that, side by side with that, simultaneously, and in fact, in terms of the immediacy of their daily demands, they are looking at how there must be economic justice in terms of their modes of living and so on and so forth. That can bring them in conflict not only with colonial authorities, but with chiefs. Now, one testament for that is that precisely because of the efforts of Gettysburg, a growing working class was emerging. The same growing working class was beginning to gain a confluence with some of the middle class people in the cities. Ratepayers Association, Sopon, Accra, all kinds of things, Akila, Akumi, all those names that we know. They were beginning to agitate for local assemblies and so on and so forth. And behind them and around them, surrounding them, were all these mass of people surging, including the ferment that you're talking about in terms of the literary clubs, the educational clubs, and so on and so forth. It is in the moment that the same Gettysburg decided, and it's an important point, that actually this is the time to resuscitate chieftaincy. Don't forget, the most powerful chieftaincy at the time had been defeated as far back as 1896, last year. Prempeh I had gone. When they brought back Prempeh I, when was it? 1924, exactly the moment that you had both, declassé elements, people who were, former soldiers coming back, working classes coming into their own, middle class people not necessarily tied to any traditional authority and so on and so forth. So in a sense, just like Lugard pioneered in northern Nigeria, the idea all Americans, the CIA would have done after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, you stir up Islamism or ethnic. So there was always a tension, always a tension. That tension could play in a variety of different ways. Okay, but that's why I referred to the issue of class and so on and so forth, because in the notion of independence that I'm trying to put forward, I'm suggesting that the independence, the best kind of independence and national liberation that we can aspire to, and even more so now than even at that time, is one that combines two elements. One that combines a self-determination of colonized, post-colonial people, smaller and weaker nations in the world, and any act of equality is an affirmative action. The powerful must reduce in their power, otherwise it's meaningless. But likewise, we need an internal democratization, internal freedoms. The women who were market women and fighting against Awam and so on and so forth were fighting to ensure that their livelihood from trade or that the monopoly of trade is broken and that they have a higher say. If you went to them and suggested, should we have a cooperative, a public-owned cooperative that brings women to, they would have said yes. Would it necessarily have been in the interest of some chief someone? Not necessarily. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that is why you found a bifurcation in the nationalist movement. Prempeh the First was brought back in 24. A couple of years later, he was made Kumasihini. Careful. And then after a while, in fact, he died as Kumasihini. It was his successor, Agyeman Prempeh II, who ruled unto at least old man like me, like young people like this. As well, yeah, I think he died in 1970. Succeeded in thereabouts. Agyeman Prempeh II became Asantehene only in 1935. And by then you found that there was a deliberate crystallization of two things. One is that there must be hierarchies which everybody must obey. So that even if the new Asantehene was only in 1935, you had to hark back and create all kinds of traditions, whether they existed or not, to legitimize their rule. Secondly, you had a situation where there is an essentialization of the way in which our polity was run. Okay. Now, so tension was there, and you can see it reflected in aspects of our nationalist struggle. There were those who came together in the way that Nana here was talking about. That yes, we are the leaders of particular, we're the representatives of particular tribes, ethnic groups, whatever it is. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. And that if we agglomerate without necessarily changing the fact that I am born to rule, because chief, that's what sorry, of course. You are born. Without, that kind of thing, then you have a distinct. I'll pay a fine. There's a whiskey waiting for you rather. Snap, sorry. So basically, let me land on this point. The aspiration for independence that was not fully realized. I've already given a two-step process where one was more expansive than the other, the world-making dimension of it. And the world-making dimension of it is not to be underplayed. For example, the idea that there ought to be national sovereignty over natural resources did not exist before 1961. Because in 1956, for example, the UN passed a notion about self-determination that excluded all these because they wanted to protect the mining interest, the banking interest, whatever. It was people like Kwame Nkrumah, precisely because of this expansive notion of world-making, that the post-colonial revolution must alter relations in the world. That's why you found those things. The definition of anti-racism, racism became a crime. Colonialism became a crime only in 1961. So let's be clear where the sequence of the drive of different things are. The final, sorry, Prof.
No.
The final point is this. I said at the beginning that I think that the nationalism that exists today has no relationship with the previous nationalism because the one has been achieved. You have Ghanaians effectively in control of things. But the idea that the position of Ghana or Africa or post-colonial global South states, by and large, I'm not talking about China or whatever it is, okay, ought to alter the way international relations are restructured. That is yet to be realized. My contention is that that's yet to be realized because of the fact that on the one hand, you have had a hijacking of this process because people who were essentially middle-class people, all these professionals and so on and so forth, that was 70 years ago. Now you can't describe them as middle-class people. Can you describe Dangote, a billionaire, as a middle-class? He's not a middle-class. He's a full-blown ruling class type who has as much interest as any multinational in some of the mechanisms and so on and so forth. From that point of view, there's a hijacking of that nationalism. Today, we are being invited to celebrate the success, the business success of any, let's say, Ghanaian abroad or in the world market as nationalism. Aren't you proud that we have Ejapadi? There are smart enough people who can do it. Aren't you proud that we have Sam Jonah? Aren't you proud that it's the same thing you see in South Africa? We are not anywhere near the Freedom Charter of 1955. We are being asked to celebrate the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa is a billionaire and so on and so forth. My point now is then that for the equality that we require to reanimate a new vision of social cohesion, of transformation and so on and so forth, the inequality that we are all opposed to on a global scale must resonate deeply domestically as well.
Thank you. Fritz. Fritz, respond to Gyekye's proposition because you started us on a certain thought process that suggested that the way the British, the railroads and all of that were configured was meant to benefit us in the lead up to independence. And Gyekye is saying no.
I didn't say that.
I didn't say that.
I said that in order...
The mother country, but in a certain sense also. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was about the fact that that infrastructure was put into place to exploit us.
Okay.
But the thing is that they did not also imagine that one day we would be able to turn the tide and take over. And that infrastructure became the basis in which we would use to get on and create our nation. The infrastructure, the skeleton of our nation would come from the infrastructure left by the British.
Okay.
Because Gyekye did say something about the fact that we're talking about the army, the flag, and all that.
Right.
But he also said something. I am looking at it from the human point of view. I love what he's been saying, but I'm looking at the human because mine is an experience that I actually experienced pre-independence and the very early years of independence. And he was talking about the academics and what did they do. In actual fact, it was the people, the academics, who actually put the plans together for the sustaining of our independence struggle, post-independence. For instance, if you look at the national anthem, all right, it was composed by an academic. Beho was a teacher in Achimota, all right. If you look at the design of a flag, you know Theodosius Oku was also a teacher. All right. My dad was a railway engineer. I mean, he was the first Ghanaian railway engineer. And that's where he also built his strong beliefs that we could take control of our affairs.
But let me interrupt you for 1 minute, because I think Gyekye is saying that, but again, I may paraphrase him wrongly, but he's suggesting to me that some of those structures are meaningless unless there is something basically transformational about our economy, about the class system, about the powers that some of the structures left behind that we just occupied are diminished. For example, chieftaincy.
I agree perfectly. What I'm trying to say is I agree perfectly with that. But at that time, that wasn't the thinking. The immediate thing was that we're going to take our resources away, back. We'll take control of our affairs. Maybe the methodology was wrong. It's hindsight that we can look back and see that that was what we should have done. You understand? We're talking about the chiefs. And I'm very sorry, but the three chiefs that he mentioned were looked on as reactionary chiefs. Togbesri, Ofori-Atta. Ofori-Atta had done something wonderful for the British. He bought them a Spitfire plane during the war effort. You understand? And I have, well, but no, yeah, I know. But what I'm trying to say is that there were people in Ghana, traditional rulers in Ghana, who believed that it wasn't for the time for the white man to go, but it should have been a gradual process. For example, you know that in 1951, the biggest opposition was the NPP, the Northern People's Party. And the Northern People's Party was a party of chiefs. All right, we had Alhaji Yakubu Tali, we had Abu Wema, we had Baumia's father, who was the secretary to the Mamprusi traditional area. We had J.A. Brima, we had S.D. Dombo, we had Jato Kalio, we had Gyekye. All those people were all part and parcel of a certain group of people who believed that the colonialists were a part of the program, and they weren't supposed to be removed. So the NPP, which was formed, in fact, the CPP only had two people in Tamale, Mr. Adams and Mr. Idrisu. And one of them was a pharmacist, one of them was a teacher. They had to even change their vocations because they couldn't really get people to support them at the time. So what I'm saying is that there was a reactionary force to those who are agitating for independence now. And it came from the traditional rulers who believed that it was their remit to rule because they were the natural rulers, for the want of a better word, of the people, either the Kromos, the Achims, the Ashantis, and what have you. So what I'm trying to say is that he's right in saying that, but at that time, the mode of thinking wasn't about what he's talking about now. It was about, we'll take the resources and we'll use the resources and the infrastructure for our benefit. But the depth of intellectual thought that would mean the true ownership and the distribution of wealth, I don't think had been considered at length. That's what I want to say.
The chiefs were the problem.
So when I spoke, I referred to three groups of people. I referred to traditional authority. I referred to the educated activists, who I said I refuse to call elite, blah, blah, blah. And then I referred to the academicians. They've both taken it and they're throwing fire at each other, but it's not a real fire, don't worry. But I actually raised the point. And it is actually to say what is being raised, which is, at what point, yes, they were writing in the newspapers and in times of West Africa and all of that. They were doing that. Those days when the borders weren't as tight, when it was more fluent, you'd have Wolowo and others coming into town, and writing along with Dankwa and Gedema and others. That was all happening. But I'm arguing that today he's able to pick up a book and make a reference to the depth of thinking of somebody about their space. Maybe we needed that. We didn't get that. And I'm arguing, for example, that if it were the case that there were tensions between traditional authorities and these educated activists about how we should proceed, somebody didn't take time out to sit back and say, okay, so why are we fighting? After all, the enemy is one. Somebody didn't seem to take time to find that out. And so you'd find what he refers to as the tensions of the time. And for me, those are the areas that I bother about. I really don't care for raising personalities and they did this better than the other person, because it's now history. And so we're supposed to be learning from it. So for me, it's about, so when you've put all of that together, where really are we what are we sifting for? And when we found it, how do we proceed on that? If today we sit back and feel or sound like we haven't gone anywhere, I think it's because we are not doing that. In fact, this is the first forum I've ever been to where they look at independence on this level. I've never been to one before in Ghana or anywhere for that matter.
Clap for Ghana Club.
Yeah, honestly, and I look for these things, and it's interestingly in the intro that David gave, a lot of those brains were right here. The people who could have crystallized these thoughts, where there are ghosts right now lurking around us. So it's true. So for me, that's where the argument is. I accept what Nkrumah was. I accept what Dankwa was. I accept what Baumea was. I accept what Ofori-Atta. I accept all that because in their time, this is what they did. What do we glean from that to make progress? Because we're not making progress. While I say that we shouldn't be hard on ourselves, the truth is that we're not making progress.
Okay.
Yeah, so we think we're constructing roads, so we're not. We think a lot of our people can speak English, but we're not. What makes proof that we're developed or grown in our minds is when you don't have all this space. And all we get is...
Do you think we're not making progress?
It's because people are not... there's individualistic politics. People think about themselves. I don't think that if we're talking class systems, those who fall in the middle and upper class, I don't think they think about Ghana in a collective sense. They think about Ghana in an individual sense. That's my view. I don't think that they sit back and say, oh, so I've gathered all this wealth. I'm going to die. When I die, what do I want my great-grandchildren to think about, and how should they be? I don't get that feeling as a collective. So it's individuals, you'll find that.
So you're saying people are not as nationalistic today as they were in the past?
Yes, and this is one of the reasons. And this is.
I'll come back to you. I'm coming.
This is my basis for saying that. Mine is experience. Oh. I've run.
Yes.
I've been an assembly member before. I was appointed. I didn't get elected. I've been a constituency treasurer before. I've been a regional vice chairman of a political party. I've run for parliament twice. When I put all of that together, and for those who have an inkling of an idea of who I am, you realize that I don't buy that stuff. We're not doing well at all. Otherwise, Gyekye would be in parliament. You know, it's a problem. So we need to look at things, and I think primarily it's that class people.
Okay.
When they get their wealth and things, they forget about tomorrow.
Okay. I want Fritz to come in before Gyekye, because Fritz, you know, he says otherwise, if we were doing well, I would have been in parliament. Not that I want to be in parliament, but you were in parliament, Fritz. We're not nationalistic enough. You were not nationalistic enough.
We're not nationalistic enough. We don't have
friends in parliament.
That critical mass of nationalism. We choose to say we are nationalistic when it matters to us. But the deep belief to embrace everyone so that we'll move in a direction that will benefit most of the people or all of the people in this country is absent. And it's a very difficult thing. Now, we're talking about Achimota, we're talking about Infantsville, we're talking about Opukuwari, we're talking about Premier College. You go to Parliament and you'll find out that through Augustines, I'm very sorry, all the known schools, you'll find very, very few of them in Parliament. All right. I mean, I'm a member of this club, and there are a number of people who come and sit here who have the brains and the will and the sense of purpose to have been in Parliament to contribute, who say, I'm not interested in politics at all, I don't want to know at all. And that in itself shows that there's something lacking, there's something wrong. Those who've had the exposure to be able to exchange ideas and to help transform society are standing way back. They're either going to be businessmen so that they can use the system, but they won't get themselves involved in the system. I went to Parliament and I realized that there was no way I could change things the way I wanted, or where the direction that we had to look after our people, we had to make sure that the health of our people was important, the freedom of movement by building good roads. I have, for example, I'd like to state that I'm totally against the whole idea of these flyovers and the Ghana-Dubai and all that, because they don't impact on the majority of people. The cocoa roads are not there. The roads to distribute food are not there. And we know that if we have cheap food, all right, people will not think too much about foraging and think about the future. The short term is because most of the time we are foraging for food. And these are the things that come into play when I talk about the present state and the people who want to go into Parliament. Right now, most of the young people who want to go to Parliament know that as soon as they get into Parliament, they'll get a VA. They'll be given their 250,000 CDs to look for a house, to rent a house, which you can use to, yes, you can build a house. I mean, yes, I'm a benefit of the ex gratia system, but I use the ex gratia to win my election. And that in itself is wrong, because at a certain time, I had to pay, all right, to win my primaries. The actual election that I stood for, I won by a wide margin, I was popular. But within my party, I had to actually make sure that the inclination was there because I could help them immediately. So that's what I'm telling you now. But that's got nothing to do with independence, but it has to do with the now factor and why we are failing.
And Gyekye, we have not lived up to the promise. Our political system is broken. Doesn't attract the brightest and the best, right?
Well, I think it does. I mean, why doesn't it attract the brightest and the best? We have the brightest and the best becoming priests and so on and so forth. There's a particular incentive structure.
Who are priests?
Look at the number of young, excuse me. Look at the number of young, articulate, confident, charismatic people, because that is what pays. Okay, this is the market. That's what the incentive is. You go there. So I believe all those are guys that Fritz is referring to. These are people who will begin to dominate at the SRC level, student politics, so on and so forth, in the various youth movements and so on. In a sense, they are very talented people. I don't think this thing. So I think that, and nor would I necessarily agree that our intellectuals haven't played a role, because I think, unless we're thinking of them as a homogeneous group, which has never been the case. So there's always been, a variety of shades of opinion. So, for example, you would have found that the type of nationalism that Kwame Nkrumah represented, the type of project, even at the level of organization, was the kind of thing that was born at the Manchester 5th Pan-African Conference, 1945 in Manchester. It was a dramatic shift from the pre-existing nationalism that existed. I won't go into the details, but I'm simply saying that reflects the fact that there's a variety of different ways. Cabral, and I don't mean our good friend Cabral here, I mean Amilcar Cabral, the recognized the nationalist leader of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, one of the most preeminent figures in African liberation. In fact, post-colonial global South liberation, said this: there is no tribalism. We are not struggling merely so that we have a flag, an anthem, and ministers. We are not going to install ourselves in the governor's palace. That is not our objective. We are struggling to liberate our people, not only from colonialism, but also from any form of exploitation. We want no one to exploit our people anymore, neither whites nor blacks. Now, the second part of his last statement is where I think we've fallen down. So that I think they are nationalists today. I don't think it's a lack of nationalism. I mean, when people wear badge, Ghana against what was it called? Ghana beyond aid and all, they're nationalists. Why are they not? In fact, they have to be nationalists. How do you become, if Fitz is saying that you take advantage of the system, you have to have some degree of say in the system to take advantage of it. Do you think those people will be happy to sit down for some foreigner to take? No. So they are nationalists, just of a different kind. And I'm suggesting that the reason why I'm here, one is to, take my book, register with Ghana Club once again, but that's the minor part. The more reason why I'm here is precisely because of the ferment at any dramatic moment of social change. The ferment within the middle classes, which means the contestation, the argument, debates, is decisive. It's decisive at the level of ideas and so on and so forth, and for obvious reasons, education, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Of course, that ferment doesn't take place in isolation. It takes place within the context of real social shifts and so on and so forth. My point here is this, is that if indeed, to the degree that it is true, that a majority of people in this room represent or are the successors of those who at different times wrote the newspapers and so on and so forth. And we have to be clear what those things meant. When evening news goes to lands in Cape Coast or Takrady, there's people waiting. This is a far less literate society than we have today, far less urbanized, far older demographically, and so on and so forth. And yet, the idea that we can reach the skies, as R.P. Baffour told his son, was palpable to a lot of people. If it's not there today, it's simply because those who are in that position have chosen a different path, and it's important to address that. It's important to address that. Let me say what they have chosen. And I think this is part of the reason why they've chosen that different path.
They're in the room, so I'm going to ask them why.
Well, I don't mean them as individuals or whatever. I'm talking about a class of people.
I know.
Please, no one should refrain from buying me whiskey just because of what I've said. The reason why is that, as I'm saying, like the Dankote I mentioned, there are many examples in Ghana. They are now part of the system. So they have made their peace with it. Aimé Césaire, the great, black writer, said this about that type of people. And that follows on the long line of Fanon and so on. He says, there are two characteristics that define them. A ferocious egoism, me, big man, and so on and so forth, and a repugnant conformism. These are the same people who will say anything about their nationalism is that ferocious egoism, you should promote me. Repugnant conformism is that any sign of authority, I have to make my peace with it. I have to become one of them, bow to call each other excellency, honorable, the most dishonorable, wretched people on earth. I have to call them, so on and so forth. So I'm making this point to throw a challenge to today's middle classes. That unless we have a radical rethink, and unless, and that's for intellectuals, we still have plenty, and even of the best kind. I'll give you an example. I mean, I've mentioned that Ethiopian woman who wrote The World Making and so on and so forth. You have a variety of different people, like, for example, the most prominent rising star of US, both liberal and less liberal thinking, is Olufemi Taiwo, who has written books on the same subject that we're talking about. Look at Atu Sechi Otu. Wonderful book he wrote in 2018, precisely on these questions as well. And they have a dissection of this colonial experience. They are not coming to conclusions different from Césaire, or standing on ambitions or traditions different from Cabral and so on and so forth. What it will take to realize it is that we can't simply be about those white boys and those girls. Yeah, that is an important consciousness to have. But what happens inside? What is the position of women? What is the position of workers? What is the position of all kinds of people who don't necessarily conform to our idea of what society should be, or will be an insult to our idea of conformism, LGBT and so on. So let me say here, unless you're a radical Democrat in this time, you cannot have the vision that will allow us to reconstruct the alliances, the joint interests, the majoritarian democracy that can be the basis of the power to transform some things. We saw an inkling with it with Kwame Nkrumah and so on and so forth. We need something better, deeper, more permanent, more lasting today.
Thank you. So now I'm coming to you because they've thrown out a lot of ideas, and I think I like how Gyekye ended, throwing the challenge to the Ghanaian middle classes. I'm not saying it's you. It's not individual. You will get your whiskey. But I'm throwing the challenge to you. What do you think has gone wrong? Do you agree with some of what the panelists said about what went wrong? And what I think we should end here by saying, what can we do? What should we be doing? What should we be thinking of doing? Who wants to take a stab? And please introduce yourself. And
my name is Adolf Affel. I was invited here by a few executive members of the club. I happen to be in town. I think I agree with everything that I've heard from all the panelists. But I believe that it boils down to one simple thing. I believe along the way, we lost the idea of Ghana. We have lost it. And I say this because if you do a survey, if you go to any country that you decide to pick, any country, doesn't matter what, and you ask them, what is the idea of America? That's a simple question. You take, let's say the survey is for 10-year-olds, irrespective of which country it is. The 10-year-old Ghanaian child can say a few words about the idea of America. Freedom, opportunity, and all those things, which might not necessarily, it's not a perfect system. I know you're drinking water. I just want to make sure you don't choke on it, right? But all these 10-year-olds worldwide will say almost the same identical things. Now, if you ask a 10-year-old Ghanaian who can say the same things, and you reverse the question about this nation, what is the idea of Ghana? Blank, blank, blank. Move it to 20-year-old, blank. You go to 30-year-old, blank. You go to 40-year-old, blank. In the 50s and 60s, those who were affected with the independence struggle, you begin to get some of these answers. You begin to get some of these answers. And anytime people are not fighting for an idea, apathy sets in, and it becomes me, my wife, my children, and that is it. So that's where we find ourselves right now. So I'm enjoying all the panelists.
okay, we don't know who we are, Mr. Adolf. We don't know what Ghana stands for.
Thank you very much. My name is Sydney. I've been enjoying the insights of all the panelists. And my full name, Sydney Asensu-Jamna. I'm a member of Ghana Club. And I've been enjoying the insights of all the speakers, the panelists, and their very refined submissions. The last person talked about a 10-year-old. So I think trying to bring the conversation to thinking in simple terms. As a 10-year-old, let me ask a question. Independence means free. So 66 years on, as a 10-year-old, are we free? Or we are now trying to be free from aid? aid in respect of economics, political, cultural, social, did those who founded Ghana and wanted us to be free have those ideals been realized? So that's the question. What do I think? Well, from the conversation, we're now, from what he said and what I've heard, we want Ghana beyond aid, which so we suggest that Ghana operates with aid, not only economically, but we need people to aid us to find ourselves socially, culturally, right? I have read more books written about the Asante Kingdom from Rattray and all those people, but from Asante people. So I want to ask them this simple question. Thank you. Please clap for me.
Yes. Submission from the floor, and then I'll come to the panelists. Anybody? Surely you don't all agree with everything that was said today.
They don't have to disagree.
Yeah.
My name is Abraham JC. I'm a member of this club and I'm 80 years old. I remember as a little boy growing up in Kumasi, whenever we heard, what's the Kwame Nkrumah River? I'm telling you how I felt as a child at the time. I will eat, I'll go stand by the side until he comes to pass. So I can also say freedom when he says, I didn't understand what it meant. But what I'm trying to allude to is the fact that there was a certain feeling, call it patriotism, call it a certain feeling that galvanized all of us together, which meant that if anybody came and told a story that something good, it was because of 10 years say, yeah, this that patriotism today have survived to think it doesn't sustain certain. And then also, even though human beings naturally could be a lot of interest in looking after their own interests, the idea of thinking about each as a friend and thinking about what of each other was part of it as I was thinking about words. So the market will go and make we will take when Gyekye and come and sell the market. The plumber will not use some fucking material to work on the house in charge. Everybody was able to consider that consideration for the welfare of each other. I'm sorry to say, I don't see anymore. And lastly, I'd like to observe that we have all become dignified armed robbers. Dignified armed robbers, they said, if I can take that which is there, make it mine. It doesn't matter, I have to take it, it's mine, the family, that's all. Pastors are doing it, teachers are doing it, marketmen are doing it, drivers are doing it, artisans are doing it, academicians are doing it, politicians are doing it, everybody's doing it. So being selfish has become, hello? Yes. Being selfish has become a new norm. So nothing will happen unless we change our mindset to have the same feeling, to think that we are all Ghanaians and that no one is safe until we are all safe. Today, in the health sector where I belong, we talk about One Health. One Health means you think you're a human being. If you go and disturb the animals in the forest, you also come and disturb. Thank you.
Nana, Fredua, you want to say something? Well, I'll come to you in a minute. No, that's fine.
Well, quickly, I was going to react to Balini and then I would make a point that interestingly I stated yesterday somewhere. I was saying that we don't have the right type of, we were, debating about the quality of parliamentarians and whoever else. Yeah, thanks to my sister, Longishna. A couple of years ago, I did, yes, in this case, naming, but not shaming. Thanks to her, I got a chance to do a program of Parliament. I even went to the then Honorable Fitz Baffour. The idea was what? To find out whether the people understand who a parliamentarian is supposed to be. And then in the process, I used to run a program on TV called In the House, and it was about Parliament. You'd bring on parliamentarians, and they didn't know what was going on. They know. And I'm saying now, you have an almost split parliament, and yet they are probably the worst performing parliament in the Fourth Republic because of the quality. It's not about, it's about where we want to go. What Oye just told us is that in 1940 something, in 1950 something, that 10-year-old knew where Ghana was supposed to go in some form. You know what I'm saying? Now, the 40-something in parliament now has no clue. So you cannot tell me that we have good quality in parliament. Then the last thing I wanted to say, only yesterday, I said, isn't it interesting, and I stand to be corrected, that it is argued that there's some 1% of Americans, the top 1% of Americans or the top 1% of the British or places like India, Japan, who spend their time thinking about what 100 years from now their country should look like. And in Ghana, there's 10% of people of the same top who are thinking about, so what's Ghana going to look like this afternoon? It's a problem. It's a real problem. And that's what we are. As far as I'm concerned, when you sat back and analyzed independence, you should be thinking about school. If we didn't do what we're supposed to do in 57, what about 23 going forward? And that's when the question that you threw back to. Although I side with you on the fact that you haven't mentioned any names, the truth is that that core group of people are in this room. And the likes of them are out there. The challenge is you, really, ultimately. Because when I talk to folks and I want to run for parliament, then really? Meanwhile, you're probably making 1 million CDs every month. When I went to this man put together everything that we needed for, when I said convention, we went to his constituency. He got barely, I don't think he had people come to sit down. Well, did everything that he had to do. When I say that, I mean, he brought the water, he brought the drinks, he had the music, he had the canopy, anything that typically is expected of them, just so that they would sit and listen, so that they would stop demanding of him abortion fees, funeral committee fee, so they'll begin to focus on, So we have a fundamental problem, and those who can solve it are the likes of people in this room.
Clap for him. Cabral, and then I'll come.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Cabral Amidi. Used to be a journalist. Since I stopped writing, I consider myself a writer and a historian. I would like to express my gratitude to Fredua and my nephew Nanas for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Okay, yeah. Thanks very much. So I'll say that I want to thank Fraser Asman for inviting me to be part of this conversation. To start with, I try to keep up with the youth of today by being on all the platforms. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Snapchat, and I'm on Facebook. Wherever they are, I'm there. And a few months ago, and you suffer for being on Facebook, on all these platforms. A young man who has very passionate ideas about Ghana wrote a comment with the prefix that when Cabral should be writing about modern politics, he's writing about the history of Ghana. And I want to commend the club for creating this platform, because we say in our local balance, it will become. And if you want to quote Fela, he says that if you want to know where you are, know where you are coming from. And I must say that most of the elements of our downside in today's politics, if you want to trace, go to 47 to 57. You have an opposition that says that you will not pass the nominees of the president cabinet to ministerial positions. And then you 56 in our history, where I all and traditional history, out of 104 parliamentarians or legislators, 30 or so voted against name Ghana. 30 of our parliamentarians in 56 voted against the name Ghana. Meanwhile, history tells us that people like Baffour were among those who championed the name of Ghana after gaining it. So to ask why parliamentarians in that legislature would oppose the name Ghana, and as Kubolu said, they were opposing it because they think Kwame Nkrumah would take the credit. Meanwhile, even the CP admitted that Dankwa started the whole process. In fact, in 1936, he wrote a poem where he said that when Bukos gets independence, it should be called Ghana. In all his writings, there was that reference. And yet, when it came to voting for the name Ghana, all the members of the NLM and the NPP, that's the Northern People's Party, voted against the name Ghana. This is not any of us. So, around 2017, I decided to write a book on the history or the story of our independence. And as Audrey said in the beginning, there are so many perspectives on history, and it depends on who's writing. But the American senators said we are all entitled to our opinions, not to the facts. So facts are taken, comments free. So I decided to do a year account of the struggle for our independence. So I have to do from 1997 to 1997, the story of Ghana's independence. And I start from 47, but you have to go beyond 1461, when the Portuguese arrived at Elmina, where Caramansa, the chief of Elmina, resisted their camp when they went to settle. So year by year, I narrate the story as if I was a witness. And by doing so, I'm able to answer most of the degrees, founders, Neymar, Ronaldo, and Messi, and who? Abedipede and Seven Apia. I answer those questions. And what else do I do? Yeah, so I'll end very soon. So, so I look at who did what. For instance, the role of students from Sinokesis, Ghana National Funds from Adesada, are not celebrated as it should be. And then Park Grant, who else? Park Grant, R.S. Blay, and last but not least, Kwabra Boni, of course, Aden Clark. In fact, I dedicate this book, among others, to Aden Clark. And that's very strange for me, knowing my leftist background, But the point is that, and let me quote, and I'll end. Aden Clark, after all the frustrations of helping us to get independence, writes this: I never realized what a prolonged battle I will have with the politicians, chiefs, and people of the Gold Coast in order to give them the independence for which they have been clamoring all these years. Now they are going to have it, whether they like it or not. Food for thought. So here was the colonial lord saying that, I see, we don't want independence. Whether you like it or not, you have it. And the role he played is so crucial that when you talk about our independence, you should remember Aden Clark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cabral. Okay. We'll have you handing it to them at the end of the program. We're about to wrap up the program now, and I would invite you to come and hand it to the president of the club. So I'm going to wrap up now. We've heard from the floor, we've heard from the... Are there any more interventions? Oh, okay.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eileen Cleary, and being Irish, I've quite a lot of interest in British colonialism, as you can imagine. But I think I was kind of interested in the idea that we have the people who can make the change, but they're just not interested. They're people, it isn't a technocratic decision, it's a question of your viewpoint. There are people who have very, very different notions of what nationalism is and what does nationalism mean. And I think that that's the really interesting trajectory for me from the conversation and from reading. So, like the British colonial, British imperialism constructed states to benefit British imperialism. Everything it's set up, the police, the judiciary, the railways, the infrastructure was set up to benefit British imperialism. The education system, it educated just enough to keep the local civil service going and so on. So the task, if you want, of nationalists or of liberation would be to dismantle that, to dismantle the colonial state, because it was set up. Even the origins of corruption, I believe, come from that state, because the judiciary were set up to defend the rights of this colonial group. The police were there to protect the property and to subjugate people who opposed their rule. So then at the beginnings of independence, and this is globally, it's not just in Ghana, I believe, you have this ideal of liberation, that independence will mean the lifting of everybody. But then it changes, and it just means that a certain group of people take over the structures that exist. The structures were never dismantled. And then you have it, so you have some of those structures, some of the industries are taken over, some of the structures are taken over, and it is that's a vision, and that's a nationalism that is there. And then you have it even degrading, so a lot of those things are run into the ground. Look at all the industries. We believed there were 300, wasn't it, different industries that existed that no longer exist. So we don't even have those. A lot of the infrastructure has been hived off to be managed by foreign interests. We've got all our mines are foreign owned pretty much, you know what I mean? And so you have, the nationalism is now just, if you want, being a beneficiary to that foreign intervention. It is gradually, I think, kind of degraded. And I believe strongly, for example, the points you were making about why are people sort of interested in their own welfare or the welfare of their family. It is because that collective idea doesn't exist. So people are in Parliament, are smart and everything, but it is what does nationalism mean to you? And I believe it's just degraded over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. And the last person, and I wish, yes, I know, that please come forward, because we only have one good working mic. But I wish somebody would perhaps end us by saying, so what should we be doing? I still Because we don't have all night. David says, well, we don't have all night. What should we be doing?
Hello, my name is Nana Asma, and I'm a member of this club. And my point is just food for thought, because I always say to my friends that the success of colonialism in Ghana is that our masters took our ruling class and turned them into images of themselves and left their system with us. That's all I have to say.
Yes. Because when I come back to the panel to get their closing thoughts, they have to tell us what next? What should we be doing?
Well, looks like I'm going to set the tone for that. My name is Fifi Simpson, and a member of the club. My question to Gyekye, is there hope?
Any more? One more.
My name is Karen, and I've listened sort of quite closely and have to what everybody has said, in particular what Eileen said about the period of decolonization covered a number of countries from Southeast Asia, Africa, pretty much the whole of Africa, and into Europe itself. And I'm wondering which of the countries that went through independence at the time that we did, can we look at and say, maybe they got some things right, and what can we learn from some of these other countries? Thank you.
There.
My name is Frank Kajako, and although I do, first of all, the gentleman who asks whether there is hope, there is always hope. Look at the number of people here. That's number one. Number two, you have a thriving set of people, especially in the middle class, who are very interested in making sure there's hope. Now, to answer Karen's question, I've traveled around Asia and I've traveled around Africa. One of the problems we have in Africa for the most part is that when we were colonized, we took everything from our colonial masters, hook, line, and sinker, without thinking about ourselves. When you look at the Asians, there are three things that they always kept. They kept their languages, they kept their religion, and they kept their culture. We dumped our languages, we took on their religion, which they will dictate to us what that means, including the language. And right now, half of our culture is being determined by how they feel our culture should be. And if you do that, you cannot at any time decide your own destiny, because somebody is always going to dictate that to you. Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, they were all colonized. None of them was, but if you like, go there and see whether they really were colonized or not. They do their own thing. Their computers are in their languages. They worship their own gods or religions or whatever they have, and they don't mess around with their culture. We mess around with ours all the time because somebody told us that what we had was bad. We need to take a hold of what we had for us to have faith in ourselves to be able to achieve. If we don't do that, we're lost.
Thank you, Audrey. My name is Robert Kumuji. I'm neither a student of history or a politician or a historian, and I kind of feel a little lost in this whole, conversation. But I feel I'd like to say something, and that basically, I've been struggling with the concept of Ghana as a nation. And people keep on talking about nationalism and who we are. And it reminds me of Basil Davidson's The Black Man's Burden. You know, I still don't get a sense of who or what we are. And this basically, I think, touches on what Mr. Affle said earlier, and a number of people have alluded to. This country has well over 50 languages. And we talk about ourselves as a homogenous group. It kind of amuses me. You know, when you travel abroad and you say you're from Africa, oh, Africa, like it's one country. And I think Ghana reflects that in many ways. Ghana, I don't think, is a state or a nation in any true sense, or at least I have difficulty coming to grips with Ghana as a state or a nation. I mean, as I said, in very general terms, you can speak about the Akans, the Gardangbe, the Ewe, and then, as it were, the northern part of the country, where there's a host of small, excuse me, I heard somebody talk about not wanting to talk about ethnicities. But Fritz alluded to the three polities at the time of, I think he said somewhere in 1920s or in early 1900s. There were three major polities in Ghana at the time. And even then, I don't think these were homogeneous groups in themselves. So for me, I think there's an even more fundamental problem as to we have been carved out as this state, Ghana. And apart from a brief period of nationalism when we thought there was a common oppressor and people were thrown together to fight that, or we had a common enemy when people came together, I don't really see us as being united in any true sense, having common goals, common aspirations, common philosophies, moral codes of conduct or anything like that. For me, this is the difficulty I've been struggling with. I don't know whether anybody feels the same or has anything to comment on about that. Thank you.
We have not constructed ourselves as a nation.
Thank you, Audrey. My name is Preba. To address Roberts first, I do think that we do have common values, okay? And I think that's something that we all have in common. However we express ourselves in terms of how we see ourselves, I do think that we have common values. Unfortunately, the values that have come to the fore have expressed not so much in terms of our common cultural values so much, but more in terms of our common religious values and what they mean. And that, I think, is part of what is undermining us as a people. That's my personal view. Okay. But I want to address the point of the failure of the middle classes to come to the fore. Because I didn't give my surname, but those who know me know that I come from a middle class that effectively came to the fore. My father was one of the people who decided that he would do what he could, and he stood up. And I saw what the country did to him. I saw what the people did to him. I saw the cost of that to him. And I know the cost of that to our family. So for me, it's very personal when I say, when I'm quite happy not to get involved. I will do my voting as I do, and I vote religiously. I would tell you that the only election I didn't vote in was the one we just had, the last one we had, because I could find no credible party to vote for and no credible person to vote for. So I didn't vote. And I think that speaks to the fact that I feel that our political system has effectively failed us. And that if we are to find our way out of this, it has to be a way beyond our political system. We have to somehow get past our political system to engineer our way out of where we are.
Finish your point.
No, so I mean that's the point I want to make. I don't think the solution for us is a political one, because I think that we have. So the solution for me is not a political one anymore. We've learned that. We thought that we were elected into power, those who would change things in the way that we felt needed it to be changed. We thought that the middle class was coming to the fore and the change would happen. But the political system with which they were working was such that it effectively corrupted them to the point that Eileen made, to the point that was made also by the other gentleman, that effectively we just adopted the system and the system is failing us. The question is, how do we get past where we are by going past a political system that is effectively failing us?
If I can rephrase, because that's what I want us to, the panel to end with, and if there's one person in the audience who wants to add to it, that's fine as well. How can we get past where we are today? Because we are all agreed that we are not in a happy place. I'm not sure whether the way is to get past the political system. I'm not sure. But Baba thinks perhaps we have to bypass the political system. It's just that she's not sure how it would. And importantly, what Robert said, how can we sort of gel together and reconstruct our nation so that there's a sense of, Robert, a sense of common purpose, maybe? A common identity. So I'll start with Nana Fredua in the middle, Fritz, go to Gyekye, or Fritz, yes,
He was
Okay. Well, that's fine. Fine by me step forward as middle class to obey Preva's strictures on how it goes. First of all, Frank, I mean, if there's one success story we have, I think it's religion. I mean, the only multinational companies we have in Ghana are church. They go abroad, this, that. No, I'm serious. We have basically turned the religion into for us. So, for example, if the Anglican Church or the Methodist Church says have a different view of sexuality or certain social relations, the African group rebels and so on and so forth. So it's important that so when you say we don't have a religion, I think we very much have. The reason why I put this to the fore is that my sense of where we go from has to be a deeper democratization. No, God is God. I mean, I'm not a believer of any sort, but I understand God is God, right? Okay. So from that point of view, my point is about democratization. Because one, if you take the faith community as a start, the point I made about quoting Cesar, okay, ferocious egoism, and wretched conformism is precisely the point. There is no movement within the religious community to challenge all the nonsense going on. But everywhere in the world, in fact, if religion is characterized by anything at all, to the degree that it can become a force for social good, it always involves internal debate, internal conflicts, and so on and so forth. Your Martin Luther King Jr. didn't drop from the sky, and the whole of the Southern Christian Bishops' Conference supported him. He was isolated for a long time until Malcolm X died for so on and so forth. Okay, we can go back even further in history. There is no religious group here, which says, this kind of, whatever you want to describe this thing. Basically, it is not what gives us a sense of humanity. It's not what gives us a soul. Because what that religion does above all else is to reinforce the hierarchies that I'm talking about. Unaccountable power. Today, the three most powerful groups of people are pastors. Because when they talk, you can't talk back. God is saying, who are you? Chiefs, you can't talk back because, again, tradition, God, this thing. Even our presidents are saying the battle is the Lord. The other one who says God chooses leaders, which makes you wonder, why are they wasting our time asking for votes, votes and so on and so forth. My point is this, there is a way in which these structures of power reinforce the idea that you cannot question. And the religion itself, even in our daily habits, reinforces it. It faces people. The idea that there's human agency, which can have a vision of society, take control of the circumstances, is being effaced. If I give you 10 cedis and you say, God bless you, why? Did God give you the money? So I'm no longer, I'm just an empty, stupid vehicle and God just robotically gives me 10 cedis to look for Audrey and give it. No. So that's at the most minute level. I'm simply saying, so if that same democracy, let me extend it further into society. Prabha says, let's go beyond the political system. Well, what I understand, one way of interpreting that is that the political system right now is of a particular type. Okay. But if you were to say today that let's democratize, for example, demystify democracy elections, make it part of daily lives, where people's real interests are at stake, you will get very far. So if there's a conflict in Boku, and the Boku conflict is expressing itself on the basis of the fact that Kusasi people's chief was gazetted by Gadisberg to be a give tribute to another chief, and therefore and therefore our only way forward is to have a chief of our own. I don't think that solves the problem. Because for the fundamental people in issues in people facing Boko is whether do I have enough land? Do I have enough, market for my so on and so forth? If you had a democratic committee, let's say your local assembly, which says we're going to have elected land and agricultural trade committee, we have public meetings, we have a quota for, and people on a daily, weekly basis. In the same way as you gather for market, you go to church, you go to the mosque, these issues are deliberated, real solutions are brought. You fought a common interest cannot just come like that. It is the material interest. In the same way, you can have a water and sanitation thing, and Fritz's concerns about Dubai and so on and so forth translates into how democratization involves our sanitation, our water, our public toilets. Not that some party has won. So now this asshole shit place. Sorry, no, because the degradation in my language is nothing compared to the degradation people have faced. If you have a situation where public toilets are now becoming the monopoly of some people, it's just a wretched existence. So I am saying that democracy requires us to confront certain things. Ethnicity, for example, whether you like it or not, a chief represents his people. And he represents his people in a system where if I don't come from his place and I go to farm, my rights on land are different from the people who come from it. So with a woman and so on and so forth. Now, where have you heard this? If you go to a supermarket right now, you say, I'm buying cake. So are you pay 5 cedis? Are you going to pay 1 cedi? Would that make sense to you? So why am I paying a different tax on land? If you go and buy a house in Britain, will you be charged? Okay, well, so on so forth. I'm simply saying there's a radical need to be open about it. And that's why I come back to the question of conformism. I do not believe the middle class will change in the world. I don't think so. What I'm saying, though, is this, that they have a historic role when it comes to the fermenting of ideas, the reconstruction of visions, and so on and so forth. In other words, in the same way as in the past, we saw different fractions of the middle class aligning with those above them or those below them. It is for people to take that up. Let me give you one last example to land, because the question of inequality is central. People have said, quite rightly, if you take our system, Ilo said it, Robert said it, and so on and so forth. If you take our system, let's say our education system, it was built, one, to train clerics and so on and so forth, train a civil service, which would be, nonetheless. So it has certain results. In 1901 to 1951, there were only about 800 additional schools built in this country. In 1951 to 1961, 150,000 new public schools built. The university population grew from 200, because the university had founded 48, 251 to 4,000 in 1961. Of the 4,000, 40% came directly from cocoa farmers, fishermen, and so on and so forth. Now, if you want to account for the fact that life expectancy in Ghana grew from 1961 to 1962 at an unprecedented rate, that is one reason. If you want to account for the fact that, all kinds of things that took place, if you want to even account for this notion of a common understanding, it is because people had a vested material interest in the way in which the education system is developing, in the way in which there's certain public structures which ensure that even the poorest farmer has a certain minimum floor for the income of his farming, so on and so forth. Today, when you say food for jobs, it's somebody's bonanza for fertilizer. He won't even produce the fertilizer here. When there's a war somewhere else where they produce the phosphate, now you are all stuck. And even now you take advantage of. COVID comes, you sack, because people have power. Don't mistake it. Power is to create something that doesn't exist without even bothering to this. So if I am sitting somewhere and by the stroke of a pen, I can create a market and a monopoly that anybody who comes to Kotoka Airport, you are tested for COVID by a company that didn't exist before, makes hundreds of millions of whatever it does. So that's his power. So to create a market, to create opportunity, the capabilities are there. What matters is who is for. So that democratization, that insisting that women cannot just be beaten left, right, and center, that if you are ever you are no worse than somebody else, if you are Dagati, so on and so forth, all those things, that assault on ethnicity, that assault on hierarchy, that bowing down before chiefs, priests, it has to stop. And when you do that, you bring that democracy home, because how I cultivate my land, whether I have tractor services, whether I have a market or not, these are questions I confront together alongside my people in the community. We elect people, we remove them on that basis. We don't even have to wait 4 years. We can pass a new law which says that we do have an election at the marketplace every 6 months. What does it cost you? They just put a box there, you go and demystify it, bring it down. But for that to happen, people have to be organized. And if you're going to follow the priests and pastors and chiefs and these political parties, you won't. So I am saying, is there hope? Well, let me end on this. As long as the level of pent-up and satisfied demand, you can probably say there's hope. Because that's how a lot of change starts. Change comes with a refusal. It starts with no. Okay? Nonetheless, when there's a real vacuum about alternatives, that change can go in a million different directions. It can blow up all manner of, and that's the power racket we're sitting on now. So the agency of now is what I'm trying to talk about. And that agency of now starts with that kind of, me, I'm a middle class person. My alliance has to look down below me, not up above me. And I'm inviting people to do the same.
1844 is something that I think we should all try and study. For me, when I took the law course with the objective of becoming a lawyer late in life recently, and they made 1844 stick out very clearly. It is a major, major, major issue. When you give all your laws and everything to somebody to determine for you, that's basically your very existence, your culture. Frank was talking about culture. That's what you've done. So that day was a sad day, and we need to figure it out. In Africa, we've attempted all forms of this Western democracy thing. Umoja, from Tanzania, with Nyerere and all of that, where English was not the necessary language to use in Parliament. They spoke their language, so they could get a farmer to sit in Parliament and deliberate on national issues. The colonizers who had left still tried hard to come back and destroy it because they saw where it was going to take Tanzania. And if the rest of Africa followed it, probably cost them even more. So it's not like, it's been looked at. I'm raising that to say that if we put our shoulders to the wheel, if we consciously decide that we're going to become that 1%, for me, I think that it's about minds, and therefore a certain group of minds. When you work with even a society or a community of people, you cannot get 100 people to come up with one idea unless somebody takes the role of leadership. So it's one or two people who now decide, and then the 100 people follow. Fact, whether you like it or not. So for me, it's about, yes, I still insist that those three groups of people that I highlighted in the beginning still hold a responsibility to us today. Traditional authorities, we need to take them away from what we seem to have built them into, whether you like it or not. When you come to Chibi and I stand up and they say, this is the Chidompeni, your chains are Sunkahin, whether you like it or not, you need to deal with me. And you see, we shouldn't be eager to throw that away. We should be eager to capitalize on it because that's what identifies us. Then you answer the question that Frank was raising. We need to have our identity. So we need to work with that in developing what should become us and build our country. Finally, I thought years ago, actually in my university years in America, when I thought that I had figured things out, read a bit of Nkrumah, read a bit of Garvey, had met the likes of Sekou, Kwame Ture, Angela Davis. I came across all those people. Malcolm X's daughter, Shabazz, I forget her name. Yes, the daughter. Met all of those people, talked to them, listened to them, raise questions. Sometimes you raise questions they themselves can't even deal with, on matters of African economics, even there in America. But when you've crystallized all that, then I'm asking, so why are we still celebrating independence? Why? And that is why this forum, for me, is worthwhile. And this is the kind of discussion that shouldn't stop. Not because we're going to be talking about independence, but we should figure whether from tomorrow onwards, we're going to try and act the part. You don't have to necessarily be in the forefront. But when you see a Fitz Baffour standing up and saying, we need to do this is what's going to happen. You can close your eyes to his politics and say that what he's saying is what matters. And it's not his partisan stand or, an approach, and deal with those issues. And there are some things that he and I are able to host a program together because there are some politics that if you bring to the table now, he and I will respond to you as if we're in the same party, we're in the same party. We need to think like that. We need to think like that. So for me, thank you very much. I need to rush out, so I hope you don't mind. You do? Because we started late, and I need to rush out. So
You can't take time.
if I stand, if when I stand and you stand, that means you respect my chief, so I'll stay. You see, they are stated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And honestly, we should say a big thank you to Nana Fredua and allow him to go. Otherwise, the next time we invite him, he won't come. So Nana Fredua, thank you so very much for contributing to this very lively conversation. Thank you. And a slight sankofa before I have Fritz make his final submissions. And it was a reminder that Karen had asked a question. Example of countries that were where we were during independence and have done things differently. Is that correct?
No, very quickly, because I thought it will help me amplify two things. One is the problem of ethnicity if you don't confront it, because of the way it fragments all kinds of loyalties and economic processes and so on and so forth. The second is the role of the middle class. Like I said, I don't think that the middle class in and of themselves will change anything. What the middle class has as an asset is its capacity to act as glue. It is the one that, and therefore, if you like, generalize local, create a synthesis. The case of South Korea, I think, is important. And all those countries that Frank actually mentioned, if you notice, compare South Korea to India. South Korea, all the local chiefs were cleared out. It's an important point to make. India, you have your castes and you still have that fragmentation and so on and so forth. I'm saying there's a lesson there in us, for us. For me, one way or the other, at some point going forward, not necessarily as a cultural thing, but as a socio-economic and political, thing about rights and hierarchies and so on and so forth, the idea of ethnicity has to be confronted full on. The role of chiefs has to be scaled back drastically, so on and so forth. And one of the examples is precisely what I'm saying. Okay, that where you have had a general process where there's a possibility where the middle class can offer an agenda which aggregates across different localities, ethnicities, and so on and so forth. So when the Americans in 1997, 1998, in the Asian crisis, were describing crony capitalism, accusing South Koreans of crony, they didn't mean some tribe somewhere. What they meant is that the South Koreans have frozen even their own ally Americans out and are taking care of each other. That was a vision that the ruling class could offer, which for all kinds of reasons, if you look at the history of Samsung alone, you can understand how a middle class can rise, and it has a whole chain of people from agricultural workers, farmers, people, women traders who want insurance, because Samsung was a noodles trading company, and so on, and went on to develop its chain and so on and so forth. So the key thing about eliminating the fragmentation, the divisions around ethnicity and so on and so forth, I think is absolutely central. And there you can have the synthesis that maybe those who, by their location, offer a more universalist or global or an all-encompassing vision, like progressive middle class types, then they can have a real role in that transformation. Bring that up.
David has an announcement about a car.
Yeah, there's somebody booking somebody else. Car number is GW755216. If it's yours, please, I can't tell. If you can move it. Fine? Yeah. In addition, there's some small shops over there, so even as we talk, feel free. Pick them up, have a bite. Because I can tell some of us are not ending,
That's an unfair comment.
So where, as Nana Fredua said, Fritz started the conversation. He's ending the conversation, but we can continue to converse around the bar, where the snacks are, in the car park. This is an ongoing conversation, but Fritz, your final submission.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of it said, and I don't want to go over all the things that have been said, but I want to, I'm very hopeful. I think that a country that is 66 years old is a baby. It's not an old country. It's a baby. We're going through many manifestations, and we are, that one of the reasons why we're sitting here is to ensure that we can sustain the manifestations and we won't be shocked when the true changes come. But I want to talk about Robert's intervention. We're talking about ethnicity, and Nana Fredua said, "I don't like the word ethnicity." It's because we haven't really looked at the polities that we have in our country. I'm a member of this club, and I have cousins from different parts of Ghana. And every time I sort of announce that, oh, this is a cousin of mine, oh, you have too many cousins. The undercurrents of the linkages between Ghanaians from all parts of the country are real. Ghanaians, when you say you're an Ashanti, it is not by blood. It is by the fact that you follow a certain ordinance. Because if it was by blood, then you're not an Ashanti. The word Ashanti comes from the word Osa Inti or Asa Inti. We came because of war, came together because of war. If you look at, I'll go to where Audrey comes from, Keta, you'll find out that it used to be a port. And there were people who came from Somalia, people who came from all over, who lived there and left their little DNA there. If we do our research, and I'm saying this because my late uncle, Mr. David Awatri, left a chronicle that he called the Dihia Chronicle. And it's about almost 800 pages. And he had chronicled the linkages between families from Axim to Aflao, and then from the northern part, you found out that were very, very, very interrelated. So in Nkrumah, when we had our independence, tried to remove the word tribe because it didn't apply. And it really doesn't apply to us if we really look back and we follow the research of who we are. They are languages, yeah, they are language forms. They bring us together. They may drift us apart. But the thing is that if the person is Ashanti and I'm Ga, and I have a common bond by blood, it could be something. So I'm saying to Robert that, you know, the ethnicity is actually a fallacy. And if we look for the reasons why it's a fallacy and give it a certain solidity, we'll be able to solve that problem. It's a long-term thing. But as to hope, I think that this country has got a lot of hope. When I look at all the faces here, the fact that we're sitting down and we're trying to engage and to look at the solutions to the problems that we face, I feel that as long as we're alive and as long as we're fighting to ensure that there's a certain sustained advancement in our society, there's hope. I'd like to thank you all very much for listening to us. I hope that we have another opportunity with other people and other players so that we can discuss further this thing about Ghana and its independence. But I believe that there's hope, and I believe that independence wasn't wrong. But we have to work at it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of work ahead. We're work in progress. We have to work at it. Thank you very much. Also, Gyekye, and of course, Nana Fredua has left us, but we thank him as well. The Ghana Club would like you to know that Ambassador Cabral Blair, here, his, okay. All protocols are there. His Excellency has left, has donated, has gifted the club with this book, 1947 to 1957, The Story of Ghana's Independence. And he also has copies available for those of you interested in buying. And I've also been told that this is just the beginning. There's going to be many more talks like this. perhaps not as vibrant as this one. No, I'm kidding. Perhaps much more interesting talks to come after this one. I'm not sure if you already know what is planned. So, David, do you?
No, we don't. Audrey wants to be the moderator again, but we'll see about that. This is the next in the series of talks. We started with, was it COVID? We did, what was it? What was the other one? Slavery. And then COVID came in between us and today. We did one on the history of Accra. And we did a music talk. So what we want really from you as people, and Preba, I'll come to you, is some feedback. What are the interesting topics? What should we be discussing as Ghanaians, as members of this club? Give us some feedback. Let us empanel a team to talk about these issues so we can examine and explore them. It's always good to talk about these things, and we'd like you to give us the input on what you would like to hear us put before you. And Odoy, anything to say? The president finally.
I can't but express our sincerest gratitude to this wonderful team that seemed to meld with the audience, and it was fantastic to see the interaction, the questions, and the way it's gone on. I can't but again thank our very senior member, Mr. Abraham JC, for gracing the occasion. He always makes us proud. Thank you to you all. Thank you to everybody, the team, the technical team that's put all of this together. And thank you to all of you. I'd wish that all of you would leave your contacts with the in our visitors book at the bar. And as David said, it's an ongoing series which unfortunately COVID interrupted, but which we are reinvigorating. So the plan is to have a monthly series, different topics, different aspects of Ghanaian life, honoring legends, just adding to the flavor of what is a wonderful life in Ghana and how we can make it better for not just, let's say, not members and guests, because what we do really is a social club, but the whole idea is how can you better the lives of others. So the charity work is very important, and that's what we like to concentrate on more this year, do a lot more projects. So your support would be brilliant. We support a lot of kids in Jamestown, and I'm not from Jamestown, neither is David. So that's the idea, and we'd welcome all the help we can get. So thank you very much.
Preba has a voice.
So I'm going to phrase this not as a question, but as a supposition, that I know that at the next lecture, we will have maybe some female representation, given that we are coming up to exactly International Women's Day. Audrey was our moderator. We would like to see, I haven't been to all your lectures, but I have been to some, and I think that we have women voices, we do. Let us bring them to the fore and let them speak, please. Thank you.
I have a picture from exactly 3 years ago when we had Rada, Dr. Rada Hackman. Yes, it's been 3 years. That was, yes, actually it was on the 5th of March. And then on the 6th, we had Konimo come have lunch with us when we honored him. Then we started the arts exhibition. And then just a couple of days after that, we had the first case of COVID in Ghana. We had a classical concert coming up, and then that was it. So it's been a 3-year lull, really. I mean, if you can put it like that, but there we are. We ready to go again. And once again, thank you very much.
All very much for being such a great interactive audience. And, the bar is still open, there's food, and I really think we should just continue these conversations. And the next series, the next talk, please invite more of your friends. And please bring more chairs so they will have some place to sit when the room is full. On that note, thank you very much. Have a great week.
The moderator is overreaching, but we'll do.
So much.
I just wanted to make sure.
Second, next. Sergeant Pepper, you good? Zainab.